deal with the problem of interstate commerce because they did not want to have tariffs among the states and prohibition of trade. So they said that they wrote the Interstate Commerce Clause, which was designed to make sure that people and goods and services could flow across the border. There should be no inhibition. But unfortunately, whether it was the monetary issue, which has been grossly abused, or the Interstate Commerce Clause has been abused, because now, for the past 100 years or so, they've used the Interstate Commerce Clause not to make sure there's free flow of goods and services, but to use it to regulate what is going back and forth through the state. Not only that, they've gone to such an extreme to use the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate those things that are interstate, made in the state and sold in the state, and they justify and they say, well, if you make it in your state and you sell it in your state, you might affect somebody else's production and sales in another state, so therefore it's interstate, and therefore they can regulate anything at all. So we have drifted so far from the original intent of the Constitution, whether it's the monetary issue or the interstate clause. But then again, we have drifted so far away with the executive branch. You know, technically it's unconstitutional to write regulations. Only the Congress is allowed to write the law, and regulations are the law. And yet, we have been complacent with that for 100 years or so. At least we started off pretty well. The executive branch was not writing the regulations. But today they write regulations wholesale, and they become the law of the land. Congress passes a law, and they send it, and then the executive branch creates a bureaucracy, and then they go and write numerous regulations, and technically they are not constitutional. When it comes to the executive orders, a president writes executive orders. Sure, the president has constitutional authority to write executive orders, to do only those things he's constitutionally authorized to do. So if he's the commander-in-chief, he can write an executive order to direct the troops and fulfill his responsibility as being the president. But he doesn't have this authority to write just any executive order and make it a law. And this is one thing that we've gotten way too far from. We have allowed the president to do this. The Congress doesn't say anything. The court upholds it. Same thing with many presidents now over the last 70, 80 years. They've, well, maybe not quite that long. In more recent history, they've started to practice this thing of signing statements. So they come in, the Congress writes a law. Most of it's pretty good, but there'll be something there the president might not like. Maybe it's putting too many controls on the executive branch, and the president doesn't like it. So he says, well, I'm going to obey this part of the law, but not this part of the law. So he more or less like has a line item veto. And they've been getting away with that. But I think the answer for that is that what my advice would be is that if a president had a bill sent to him and he knows there's a part that he either doesn't like because it annoys him, or maybe it's unconstitutional would be another reason, he does have a lot of authority. It's legislative, it has a lot of power. So under those circumstances, what the president should do, in my estimation, is just veto the bill. And then we wouldn't have to have all these arguments. But we're in a crisis in this country today because there's so little respect for the rule of law. We've gotten to a point where the people have allowed the government to do so much. They go to war without declarations. They print the money without authority. They write laws without authority. And now there's essentially no respect for the Constitution at all. And if we don't restore that, I'm afraid that we're in for a lot more trouble. We're in enough trouble now. But it is this lack of respect for the Constitution. There was a time when there was a lot more respect. But take the issue of education. The Constitution essentially says nothing about education. The only place the Constitution would imply that it has some responsibilities would be in the capital, in D.C., because it's a capital city and it's not run by a state. There's no authority for the government to be running our public school system. So therefore, there's no constitutional authority to have a Department of Education. We should actually get rid of the Department of Education. sometimes these things that come up when the government does, and we get tired of it and know they're inefficient. If they technically were really productive at it, let's say that the federal government got involved in education, the quality of education skyrocketed, we got twice the benefits and with half the money. You say, boy, I'll tell you what, we really need the federal government in education. But you know, we don't have that much. We don't need to discuss that because there aren't very many things that I can find anything the government, the federal government, can do better than the local government. So we don't have to do that. You know, and technically, almost anything the government has gotten into, generally what happens is when they inject funds. You have the inflation of the Fed, but then if the government comes and they get involved in something like education and push funds into education, you don't get more quality. What you end up is you're getting higher prices. So this is why, when you look at it, the cost of education is skyrocketing. Now the government has been involved in medicine for 40 years or so. I actually, when I started practicing medicine out of medical school, the federal government was essentially not involved. It was before Medicare and Medicaid, and you know, the truth is, it did pretty well. The costs were so low. The bureaucracy wasn't there. There were no corporations that were making a lot of profits. Now the corporations are very much involved, whether it's the drug companies or insurance companies or management companies. So they're the ones who get involved in making a lot of profits. But generally speaking, though, when the government gets involved, quality goes down and costs go up. And people get very annoyed. They don't understand it. You know, what would happen if you didn't have the government taking care of us and having the Department of Education? What would happen if we didn't have Obamacare? I don't know. Maybe we'd have better health care if we didn't have all this other care down the road. But costs will go up. In D.C., for instance, the education there, like I said, is under the jurisdiction of the federal government. And they get a lot of money per student. Now, do we have any homeschoolers in this audience? Yeah, we have a few. So you'll identify with this a little bit. Because homeschooling can be done, and they're known to be pretty efficient. We understand homeschoolers have pretty darn good education. And it costs a lot less money. Well, the extreme opposite of getting an education at home when the conditions are permissible, if you compare that cost to the cost of educating a child in District of Columbia, they get $17,000 a year per student in D.C., and every year the people who run the schools in D.C. come and they beg and plead and they say, we have a mess here. I mean, we can't do anything. We need more money. And of course they end up with more money and the quality goes down and they have that all that mess. And when you do try to clean it up, there's practical, I mean, there's some really, really angry people, which is also the possibility that we'll get here in this country because our country is bankrupt. It's too bad Jefferson didn't win the argument at the time of the founding of the Constitution and writing the Constitution. He wanted a prohibition against deficit financing in the Constitution. I think that would have been a great idea. It's too bad we didn't have that.
Definitely.